So how does responsive web design with Bootstrap work? Let's take a look. So back over at the Bootstrap docs, which are really good by the way, and I thoroughly recommend reading if you want more detail on anything that we're covering. Let's go over to Layout. A quick look at the overview. So first off, Bootstrap has divs with classes of container. And they do what you might imagine, they contain the content within them. You can use container fluid to use a container which stretches the whole width of the user's screen. Now this bit here is where the magic really happens. Bootstrap uses something called media queries to have what are known as breakpoints. Now breakpoints are device widths below which the layout of the page changes. So if, for example, I take my screen and I make it narrower and narrower, nothing's really changing yet, but something did change there. Can you see? So we have a breakpoint at that point, which as we get narrower, increases the margin on the left and makes everything a little bit smaller. If we keep going, we should find another breakpoint. There it is. So that's changing the layout yet again. If we keep going, I think there's one more. There it is. So there's a jump just there. There it is. And I think that's the last one. Oh no, there's another one even there as well. And that's the thinnest breakpoint there. So there's a number of breakpoints, and the layout is then going to be different for screen sizes above or below those breakpoints. And that's actually quite easy to achieve in CSS using media queries. We have actually seen media queries before. You may remember them from our good old example.com where we started the HTML section. If we control or right click and view page source, there's a media query at the bottom of the style sheet, which I did mention but we didn't go into any great detail on at the time. And essentially what this says is that this is a media query and these styles will then be applied as long as the width is less than 700 pixels. And that's all a media query is. It's a set of styles that are applied at a certain width. And we can see the effect that that has on example domain. As I go narrower and narrower, at some point around here, I'll hit 700 pixels. And then you'll see the design flip. There we go. So that grey background only exists above 700 pixels. So you can see below 700 pixels, the background color is white, FFF, and we lose the border radius and padding and everything else. So example.com is very slightly responsive. You've got a kind of mobile version here and a desktop version here. We can do a bit better than that though. We don't just want to have two versions, we want to have several different versions. However, you're probably not keen on creating several different designs or layouts in your websites. That's where something like Bootstrap comes in really handy, because we can just have a single layout which then readjusts itself nicely each screen size using grids. So let's have a look and see what the Bootstrap website has to say about grids. So the grid system definitely isn't unique to Bootstrap. It's become an extremely popular way of setting up a responsive website. So I'm going to look at a very particular example first off, and then we'll see some more general examples. So here we've got 3 columns, and this is the code that creates them. So I'm actually going to copy this code and we'll look at it in our own bootstrap.html file. I think it'll be slightly clearer there. So we'll leave our hello world h1 in, and then we should really put hello world inside the container. Everything on a Bootstrap page would ideally be inside a container. So what we've got then is a div with a class of row, and then another div inside that with a class of col sm4. What on earth is going on there? Well, col is short for columns, sm is short for small, and 4 represents 4 columns. So the Bootstrap grid system is split into 12 little columns. So what we're essentially saying here is create a div that is 4 mini columns wide, and then another one that's 4 mini columns wide, and then another one that's 4 mini columns wide. So now, if we stretch that out full width, we get 3 nice columns, all nicely spread out. They're a third of the width of the whole page. As we bring things in though, you can see we're seeing those breakpoints already. The main breakpoint, however, is going to come in any moment now, and there it is. So you can see we've shifted from having 3 columns all the way across to having them stacked. And that's the key idea of grids, that the columns will arrange themselves differently depending on the width of the user's screen. And that's really the key idea of how grids work. There's a little more subtlety to it, as you might imagine, and I'll show you just a couple of extra features now. Firstly, you might be wondering what this SM really means. Obviously it's short for small, but what does that mean? Well, there are a number of different breakpoints that you can use within Bootstrap, and the small is the first breakpoint, so that's around here. But we've seen that there are breakpoints. There's one there, and there's one there as well. So if I want to use a larger breakpoint to be the point where this switches from horizontal to stacked, then I would just change that to MD, short for medium. And if we have a look at that now, so that will stack at the medium breakpoint. So it's getting smaller and smaller, and there we go, now it stacks. So the medium breakpoint is around there. So that can be really useful, depending on how much content you want to have in each of these columns. To give you the details of what the various options are, so the small columns will stack at 576 pixels. So that's about this kind of width, the first example that we looked at. Then medium will stack at 720 pixels, which was the second example, and then large at 940 pixels, and extra large at 1140 pixels. Now, when you get really fancy, you can start mixing the small widths with medium and large to create really quite complex different layouts depending on screen size. If you're interested in that, then just have a look at some of these examples here. I think they're quite complex, so I'm not going to go into them in great detail right now, but we will be looking more at them later on. For now though, I'm just going to give you a quick challenge, and that is to create from scratch a 50-50 width layout. So 2 columns essentially, 50% of the screen each, which then collapse when my screen size is less than 720 pixels. Go for it. All right, hope you managed it. We start, as always with Bootstrap, with a container div. And then we use a row div to say that we're creating a row. And then our first column is going to have a class of COL for column. Now we want this to collapse at 720, which is the container width associated with medium, so MD. So we're going to use column dash MD, and we want a 50-50 width. That means out of the 12 columns, each of our 2 halves is going to be 6 columns each. So we've got COL for columns, MD because we want to switch at 720 pixels to a stacked view, and then 6 because we want this to be half the screen. And I'll just call it the first half. And then we're going to use exactly the same code for the second half. And that's it. Let's take a look then. So it's stacked there, which looks promising. Once we move to 720 pixels, which is around here, there we go. It switches to horizontal. Fantastic. So I hope that gives you a basic idea about how we use Bootstrap to create responsive websites. What we've got so far, though, doesn't look a lot like a website, and it definitely doesn't look that beautiful. So we're going to start looking at some of the Bootstrap components that can help us create a professional looking website in just minutes. And the first of those that we'll look at is the navbar.